Hello there, welcome back to my world of stuff. It's Sunday, the 16th of February 2025. That can only mean one thing. It's Christopher Eccleston's birthday. The Ninth Doctor is 61 years old today. I hope, sir, that you're out there having a fantastic birthday with loads of pop, crisps, cake, and maybe there's little jellies in moulds. Can't imagine that he is, but you never know. So it's quite timely, I suppose, that it's Christopher's birthday today. And yesterday we had an announcement that he's back. He's back as the Ninth Doctor alongside Billie Piper for the first time since that first Doctor Who series way back in the mist of time, a terrifying 20 years ago. But they're not back on TV, unfortunately. They're back with Big Finish. But it's good to have the Doctor back. I won't be listening. I'm not a Big Finish fan for various reasons that I won't expound upon here. Not really my thing. But for those who enjoy the sort of the retro Doctor Who stuff that they've done, and even their incursions into what's known as New Who, Modern Who, I hope you enjoy hearing the Ninth Doctor back with his main girl, Rose, played by Billie Piper. So yes, they're back. And the news that they're back made me think about that first season back in March 2005. What an important series that was, and it's not a series that I've thought about a great deal in recent years. I've watched it many times, of course. But I thought with this news that Chris Eccleston and Billie are back, it might be time to take a look back at that first Doctor Who season. Let's whiz back in our own personal TARDI to 2005. Yes, welcome back. So, the Ninth Doctor's back. Christopher Eccleston has returned to the role. He's joined by Billie Piper for a new series of 12 adventures for Big Finish. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not a Big Finish fan. However, I'm quite pleased to hear that Chris and Billie are back. It made me feel a little bit tingly, a little bit warm when I read about it last night, because these two were responsible for relaunching Doctor Who back in 2005. And of course, we had Russell T Davies and his writers and his crew and his various casts. They all worked together to bring the episodes to the screen. But if that chemistry hadn't been there with Chris and Billie, it would have been a one and done thing, and Doctor Who would have been gone for good. Now there may be a lot of people around out there, slightly sad and bitter people, particularly on YouTube, who think that might have been a good thing, that the classic Doctor Who is a thing in itself and they don't accept new Who's, they insist on calling it. That's entirely a matter for them. But Chris and Billie helped relaunch Doctor Who, and they did it brilliantly. So I thought with this news I would take a look back at that first series. I'm not going to go forensically into it. I'm not going to review every episode individually. Don't worry about that. But I'm just going to talk about the themes of the series and the way it was made and how it redefined Doctor Who for a new generation, introduced it to a new generation, and reminded older generations of a show that they loved when they were kids, but it probably put to the back of their minds because it hadn't really been on screen for 16 years, apart from the 1996 TV movie with the John Pertwee logo, starring Paul McGann. Before I start looking at the episodes, just read through the press release itself about the pair of them coming back to Doctor Who and how fondly they obviously feel of that time, despite the fact that we all know that historically there were issues around that time of the production. Christopher Eccleston fell out with the production team, or the producers, the triumvirate, if you like, of Russell T Davies, Phil Collinson and Judy Gardner. I've heard various rumours over the years. This happened, that's happened, he didn't like this, he didn't like that. I think he felt unsupported and let down when he brought certain issues that he had about the production to the producers, who I think just told him, well, to just get on with playing the part, we'll sort out the behind the scenes stuff. And I dare say there were other issues, other incidents. We may never know what they were. There will always be rumour and supposition about what happened on set back in 2004 when this first series was being made. And the fact that it hit the screen and made such an impact and relaunched Doctor Who in ways that nobody involved could ever have really expected. I'm so pleased that Chris Eccleston and Billie Piper have allowed time to smooth things over and that they're now able to embrace those characters again. Chris Eccleston himself said in the press release from yesterday, "I'm so happy to be back recording more adventures for the Ninth Doctor with Billie. I don't think my Doctor exists without Rose. He's a one-man, one-companion kind of alien. We've explored him on his own at Big Finish as a loner, but there's a resilience and a bravery and a deep empathy to Billie as Rose. That's why I do this. They complete each other. Piper herself said, "I can't think of a better time for Rose to reunite with her first Doctor than now. 20 years after she first ran into the TARDIS and towards adventure, here we are again, me and Chris, ready to have fun, facing the universe and the monsters together." And there's that lovely publicity image of them looking warm and comfortable with each other, and that's how it should be. Of course, it's not the first time they've appeared together. They've done convention appearances. There was that quite controversial one last year. I think I did a video on it, where Chris said that he'd only come back to Doctor Who if Russell T Davies, Phil Collins and Julie Gardner was sacked. Quite blunt. So they clearly don't have any issues between themselves, and I think it is nice, particularly in this 20th anniversary year, that they're coming back to the show that they defined, and they set down the template, and they laid down the markers that David Tennant and Billie Piper with him for a year, then Freema Agyeman and Catherine Tate, they followed those tram lines, and the success of the show built on the basis of this flawed first series from 2005. And I don't think anybody's going to say that it's a perfect series. It is not a flawed series. In fact, all Doctor Who, there are flaws all along in Doctor Who, things that people like, things that people don't like, production issues, poor decisions, misguided decisions, creative decisions that are made for reasons. But I think if we look back at that first season, which is what I'm going to now get around to, I'm going to project myself back 20 years in time and look at it from the way I thought about it at the time and looking back at it in retrospect. Now, of course, we heard that Doctor Who was coming back in September 2003 when it was announced, to most people's surprise, that the show was going to be rebooted. Russell T Davies was going to write it and create it and produce it. And bearing in mind, this was only a few years after he'd had his huge breakthrough on Channel 4 with Queer as Folk, and he'd done a few other things. He was already regarded as a major shaker and mover in the TV industry. And he was, of course, a massive Doctor Who fan, and he'd been lobbying to bring Doctor Who back for years, and he finally had the chance. And we had the castings came through, and bits of information came through. The casting of Christopher Eccleston was a real moment, because, of course, the press had been full of stuff about Paul Daniels, Ricky Tomlinson, David Hasselhoff, all these silly names that they plucked out of thin air, because Doctor Who still had this slightly silly reputation that it had left our screens with in 1989. Christopher Eccleston gave it a legitimacy. It made it feel as if it was a proper drama, not just this cheap kids knockoff, which it could otherwise have been. There were some concerns when Billie Piper was announced, because she was drawn from the ranks of pop poppets from the late 20th century, and she hadn't yet really established herself as a thespian as such, although she'd started building up a body of work on some TV films and things. People thought, she's quite good. We didn't know how good she was going to be, of course. And then the news filtered in about different filming things and where they were filming and what they were doing. And my own particular perspective on this is that I remember watching some location filming. In fact, one of the first days they did, I remember it quite clearly. It was a Sunday. I'd just been to see that terrible, I tells ya, 2005 Thunderbirds film directed by Jonathan Frakes, and I'd heard that there was some filming in the Cardiff Royal Infirmary, which is just across the city centre from where cinema was. So I trotted along to see it, and they were doing the scenes from Aliens of London with unit arriving at the hospital, a news reporter talking to the camera. And when you watch that episode, if you see the close-up of the cameraman talking about the body being found in the river, I'm standing very close, just on the other side of the camera on the monitor, sort of watching all this. There were crowds there. This was all a new thing. Doctor Who was still a bit of a mystery at the time. And I watched a couple of other location sessions. I went very memorably down to Swansea, to the Maritime Quarter, where they filmed The Unquiet Dead. Saw Christopher Eccleston and Billie Piper, and of course Simon Callow playing Charles Dickens. I saw the snow machines. I saw a lot of the stuff they did, those exterior scenes there. And I think later on I saw some of the filming again back at the Royal Infirmary when they were filming The Empty Child, which of course was one of the classic stories of that first season. So I was interested and I was intrigued and I was excited, and when possible I went to visit the set and have a look and see what was going on. It actually got quite boring and quite tiresome because these were always quite late night shoots. The novelty wore off fairly quickly. And when the show actually started debuting, I remember very well in 2005, the excitement, that first little mini sequence we had. I think it was on New Year's Day after The Vicar of Dibley, where they just showed a shot of the TARDIS materialising, and it's almost time, but not yet, and the show wasn't coming until March. And it built and built. We got little trailers and little bits here and there. And you may remember that the first episode, Rose, leaked in Canada, I think. It was leaked overseas somewhere, and it was available over here, and a friend of mine actually had the episode. And I remember he came to my house, it was on a stick, he put it into my laptop, watched the first couple of minutes, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do this. This was a fortnight before the episode was screened. I thought, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to spoil it for myself. And I saw enough that dazzling first sequence that I think, in retrospect, it is hugely dazzling. It's so cleverly put together that establishes Rose as this ordinary girl living in a block of flats with her mother. She's got a fairly mundane job in a department store. She's got a boyfriend. And all this is undercut by Murray Gold's, insane music, the track which of course is called Westminster Bridge. And then the series started in March 2005 over the Easter weekend, and of course it was huge. 11 million viewers for that first episode. It demolished Ant and Dec in the ratings, and it continued to be a huge hit across the season. Stepping back now, looking at it, and of course I've watched it loads of times. I've watched all those episodes many, many times, but I haven't watched them for a very long time now because there are so many other things these days to watch and absorb, and Doctor Who continues. Doctor Who is still a success, whether people like it or not, as to misquote Colin Baker slightly. But that first season is so important because it really reintroduced the show so cleverly and introduced the Doctor so cleverly. Rose, I think, still is a terrific first episode. A lot of people complained at the time, but there's no story, there's no plot. Well, there sort of is. What's interesting is that we arrive halfway in the story. The Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, of course, is charging around London. He knows that the nesting consciousness is around somewhere, and he's trying to stop it and destroy it and thwart it from its latest plan to take over the Earth. Classic long-time fans and those with long memories will remember, of course, Spearhead from Space back in 1970. John Pertwee's debut serial, which introduced the Nestings and the Autons. A very clever ploy by Russell T Davies to recreate that particular threat, because that was such a big episode, and the mannequins coming to life was like a race memory in people's minds of Doctor Who. Shop window dummies, and to see them in the first episode, I think it worked on a generational sense because it was scary for kids and imaginative and colourful, and lapsed adults who'd long since forgotten about Doctor Who would have gone, wow, I remember this. The nostalgia factor in that first episode cannot be underestimated. That's what made the episode such a huge hit. And of course this fantastic dynamism between Chris Eccleston and Billie Piper, and the naturalism of it all. Her living in a council flat, her relationship with her boyfriend Mickey, her mother, that sort of down-to-earth grounded feel, which made it work much better than it would have been if the Doctor would have arrived on an alien planet with people in silver spacesuits and deserts and ice planets and all that sort of stuff. It was very relatable, very now, or as it was very then. And I think it worked brilliantly. Rose, I think, is a smashing episode, full of great wit and spectacle. There's some great spectacle there. The Autons coming to life is what you wanted to see back in 1970, but the budget wouldn't allow. And now you had the Autons bursting out of shop windows, blasting buses and taxis. Well, a bus and a taxi. You get a bit of that sense of chaos, and the visual effects are obviously up a notch. It looks big, it looks spectacular, it's fun. It introduces the Doctor as this strange, mysterious man. We don't know who he is. He travels in time and space in a police box, which is bigger inside and out. And we watch all this through Rose's eyes. We're discovering all this with Rose, which is why the episode is called Rose, and not the return of the Doctor or the Nestings attack. It's called Rose because it's about Rose, and we're learning about the Doctor and his world and what he does through her eyes. It's brilliant, it's brilliant. And the whole season really works that way. It's all about Rose's first experiences. In the second episode, The End of the World, the Doctor takes her to the end of the world. The planet's heat death millions of years later on a massive platform, which of course is a recurring thing throughout the series. And she realises what it means to travel in time with the Doctor in space. She can see incredible things. She can see her planet being destroyed millions and billions of years into the future. Plus, of course, we've got aliens, we've got the face of Bo, we've got Lady Cassandra, we've got all these things. It's an expression, that second episode, of how big Doctor Who is and how big its universe of creatures is. And I think that built upon what we'd seen in that first episode with this shapeless nesting consciousness and its plastic mannequins. Then we see all these aliens, and it sort of says to you, Doctor Who's universe, although we don't leave this galaxy in this series, Doctor Who's universe encompasses all this sort of stuff. It's amazing. And then in the third episode, The Unquiet Dead by Mark Gatiss, we travel back to Victorian times and we meet Charles Dickens. Again, it's very clever because the first episode is modern day, second episode is distant space in the future, the third episode is historical on Earth. That sort of encapsulates Doctor Who's remit. To do modern stories, to do future stories, to do historical stories. And it's brilliantly done. A great script from Mark Gatiss. Again, kudos of getting Simon Callow, who was a Dickens aficionado anyway, playing this role. A very witty, smart, exciting script with some very clever ideas, all seen through the eyes of Rose. Rose travelling into the past, that moment where she steps out of the TARDIS onto the snow, and she sort of marvels in the fact that she's travelled in backwards in time. Those 3 episodes are perfect in presenting this forgotten show to a new audience and reminding a lapsed audience of what it is and what it can do. And I think those episodes showed how easy it was to adapt to the format of 45-minute stories. It was just a perfectly judged drama series about an alien and his friend travelling in space and time, meeting strange creatures, having bizarre adventures. People criticise the 2-parter Aliens of London and World War III. They were directed by Keith Boak, and I think this is where Christopher Eccleston's first issue arose. He didn't get on with Keith Boak, who directed these 3 episodes, which were the first block of the series. And it's no coincidence that he didn't come back to the show afterwards. But I think that they're decent episodes. I think the Aliens of London drifts a little bit perhaps into comedy with the Slitheen and the farting. But again, this is stuff that was written when the show didn't have an audience yet. So I think Russell T Davies didn't know whether to pitch it to the nursery or to the drawing room more for adults. And I think this pitched towards the nursery with the Slitheen zipping up themselves and farting in their bodysuits and so on. I can understand why old school fans were slightly alarmed by these episodes because they seem quite comedic. It's quite a deep concept behind this, these creatures who want to turn the Earth into slag and clinker and sell off the bits to the highest bidder. And of course there's a little dig at Labour Party and Tony Blair's weapons of mass destruction with a couple of lines. And it is a bit slapstick in places, but it reintroduces Rose's mother and boyfriend again and starts bringing up this idea of a regular supporting cast, a bit like the Pertwee era, which had the Unit family who didn't appear every week because the Doctor would eventually go off into space again, but they were sort of there comforting home of Unit HQ and all those characters like Benton and Yates and the Brigadier who were part of that family. And we get a similar feeling here with Jackie and Mickey coming back to the Powell estate and bringing the show back down to earth again. Incidentally, talking about farting, I'm going to mention the farting wheelie bin or the burping wheelie bin rather, in Rose, which again is still to this day, and along with the farting aliens, sticks that people beat the series with. Classic Doctor Who was much better. It didn't have farting aliens and burping wheel bins. It was 20 years ago when the show was new and fresh and just finding its way and finding what it could do and what it shouldn't do and it should do. And I think that those things are allowable and they're quite amusing because Doctor Who's always had an audience of children, and I think there's no reason why at that point they couldn't do things like that because the scripts and stories were sophisticated enough for that just to be part of them. And the rest of the series, of course, we know that there's not really a duffer, I don't think, in the whole series. I mean, we have the return of the Daleks in Dalek, Robert Sheehan's Dalek episode, which I think was the perfect episode to reintroduce the idea of the Daleks and made them genuinely terrifying. Well, I say them, there's only one in the story. But you see the power of this creature that reboots itself by a genetic binding with Rose and then slaughters everybody in this underground museum base and is a formidable one-creature threat. And the Doctor is genuinely terrified. I think it's Christopher Eccleston's first outstanding performance when he's locked in the chamber with the sleeping Dalek and he realises what's there because of what we know about what's happened there. There was a war between the Daleks and the Time Lords, which ended up with both races being destroyed. So the Doctor thought, but there is a Dalek survivor, and that alone terrifies him to the extent that he's going to become violent and destroy it with a giant gun at the end of the episode, which is very much out of character. It's a very clever, subtle, nuanced episode, but there's some great action. The series then goes on to explore the idea of the Doctor's companions, why a Doctor Who companion has to be a special person. Because at the end of Dalek, the Doctor takes aboard Adam Mitchell, played by Bruno Langley. He's this sort of teen scientist who's been working in this museum. And he wants to come on board and joins the TARDIS crew, and he does, but it's his own knowledge and curiosity and stupidity that brings about his downfall, because he's written out at the end of his second episode. And that is entirely to show that not anybody can travel with the Doctor. You have to be a very special sort of person. You have to be a Rose. You have to know what to do, how to behave, how to react. And Adam didn't, and to his own detriment, as it turned out. And I think exploring that sort of idea that early in the first series is very brave, because you think you want to focus on building up the Doctor and Rose. You've done 6 episodes with them. Now you're introducing a new character, but that character exists to show why Rose is so strong and to show why Adam isn't good enough. The Long Game is not regarded as one of the great Doctor Who episodes. It has a silly monster in the roof, but it has Simon Pegg, Tamsin Gregg in the guest cast, and indeed Anna Maxwell Martin, who's now one of Britain's most popular and respected TV actresses. And it's interesting, as it always was in Doctor Who back in the 60s and 70s, to see actors who would go on to great acclaim in supporting roles in an episode. And I do like The Long Game, even though it's clearly not one of the best of the season. And of course we have, I did say I wasn't going to review every episode, but I'm doing it. Sorry, but I'm trying to show how they created this format and moulded the format of the series and shaped what it could do and how emotional it could be. Because Doctor Who had never been an emotional series in the past, or very rarely. I think when Susan left, you had a bit of emotion. When Joe Grant left, but pretty much it was the Doctor travelling on. People came on board and went, hello and goodbye. But the Doctor didn't really show how he felt about people, and there was no suggestion of the Doctor being a romantic hero figure. But in Father's Day, we had what appeared to be Rose manipulating the Doctor to try and save her father's life. Her father had been killed in a road accident in 1987, I think, when Rose was a wee bairn, and the Doctor gets very angry with Rose when he discovers that she's using him. And of course she does save her father's life. Her father, played by Sean Dingwall, a great actor who would of course appear again in the next season, and with terrible, devastating consequences that threaten the lives of everybody on Earth, of course. Very good episode, written by Paul Cornell, very mature. And again, this is one of the first episodes that really delved into sort of the emotional side of things. You know, Rose as a human being, because generally in Doctor Who, companions would come on board the TARDIS. They would be described as an astrophysicist, a Highlander, an alien from a savage planet, a journalist. And that was pretty much forgotten as soon as they got into their stride, as they just became the Doctor's sidekick, the streaming girl or the heroic male figure, whatever it was. But there was very little light and shade to who they were as people. But the new series did more than that, of course. Here we had Rose meeting her father for the first time as an adult, and him realising who she is, meeting her mother when she was younger, meeting Mickey when he was a child. Very emotional, and that's not something that we were used to from Doctor Who. And that's what brought a lot of people on board who wouldn't necessarily watch a science fiction series, because they really liked these characters. They wanted to find out more about them. They were interested in what they were going through. They were interested in their backgrounds. This was all shading in what could otherwise have been very bland black and white stereotypes. Stephen Moffat. Let's talk about Stephen Moffat. Now, Stephen Moffat historically is one of my favourite writers for Doctor Who, but he struck gold with his first 2-parter, The Empty Child, which terrified a generation, I think, with the gas mask zombies and Are You My Mummy. They're still memes that mean a lot to people 20 years on. The problem I have, much as I think these are great episodes in themselves, there's some really good creepy imagery, and of course they introduced Captain Jack Harkness, played by John Barrowman, one of the great characters of modern Doctor Who, and it was genuinely quite scary, but it did introduce things that we would see again and again and again in later Stephen Moffat episodes, which does, I think, unfortunately have the effect of diminishing the impact of these 2 episodes, because we can see where the threads of these episodes run right through most of the other stories that he did. This story, of course, was about an alien capsule that crash lands on Earth and releases nanogenes that try to repair damage. They find the body of Jamie, the young boy, but he's got a gas mask on. They repair him with the gas mask melded to his face, and then the genes think that that's what human beings are like. They've got these gas mask faces. It's a very clever idea. It's a great idea. Fortunately, we saw it again and again in Moffat's time. A malfunctioning technology that was misunderstanding humanity and trying to help humanity, but actually harming it. Or some sort of alien or monster that looked alien and monstrous, but was actually just misunderstood. It just wanted to go home. It just wanted to be loved. These are things that came up again and again and again in Stephen Moffat episodes. These were his ideas for Doctor Who. And this is why I roll my eyes when I think about Stephen Moffat episodes, because I know I'm going to see stuff I've seen again and again. But he excelled himself with his first 2 episodes. There's no taking that away from him. But I do think that what he did afterwards lessened the impact of these 2 episodes retrospectively. Then we had Boomtown, which was an interesting episode, which looked at the Doctor, much as, say, Father's Day had looked at Rose. Boomtown looked at the Doctor and his relationship with his own particular morality. We saw the return of Margaret Slitheen, played by the brilliant Annette Badland. She is now the mayor of Cardiff. She wants to create a huge nuclear power station, the plot being that she will use the power of the station to get herself back to her own planet. It's a huge city plot, but it's not about the plot, it's about the characterisation. The Doctor captures her fairly quickly, before she's taken back to her own planet where she'll be executed. She persuades the Doctor to take her out for a meal in Cardiff Bay, where they have this discussion, which is really interesting, and the dialogue sizzles between these two, where she explains to the Doctor that if she goes home as a prisoner, she'll be boiled alive, destroyed. The Doctor, though, is immune to that. He says his view is, well, you're a criminal, you've done terrible things. It's not my place to step into the justice of another planet. You have just to put up with it. And they have this jostling thing, and it just exposes the Doctor's odd, I suppose, morality, in that he will bring about the downfall of creatures, monsters, whatever you would call them, without really thinking about the consequences for them as living beings. Because in the past, Doctor Who aliens were just monsters that raged and were destroyed or shot or blown up or whatever, but they were the living things. And it just puts that question about who is the Doctor? What gives him the right to be the arbiter of justice across the universe? It's a fascinating story, fascinating idea for a fairly thin story. And of course, then we head towards the 2-part finale, which sees Christopher Eccleston regenerate at the end. The return of the Daleks en masse, back on Satellite 5. The human race, we discover the connections to the long game, where the human race's development has been stifled by the intervention of some alien presence, and of course the Daleks arrive en masse. We get things that look a bit dated now, I suppose, even though it's still around. It's the Big Brother pastiche with Davina McCall. We get Trini and Susanna, the fashion robots. Lots of these cultural things, which inevitably happens with anything contemporary that relies on contemporary cultural things for part of their impact. They look dated 20 years later, so even though Big Brother still exists, Davina McCall's not there. Trini and Susanna, well, who knows about them now? There are lots of things that date it, but I think that looking at it in the context of then, they sort of work quite well, and it shows how tuned in Russell T Davies was to the zeitgeist and what was popular and populist, and brought that into Doctor Who. And then I had this massive finale with the Daleks, spaceships at the end of the 12th episode. Rose has been captured. The Doctor makes this fantastic speech about "I'm coming to save you." It's stuff that sort of raises the hair on your arms because it's so thrilling. And it's sort of what you always wanted, or certainly what I always wanted Doctor Who to do. The finale then, of course, sees the Doctor regenerating, and it is sad and it's sort of frustrating. It's more frustrating than sad, I think, because Christopher Eccleston, to quote David Tennant in The End of Time Part 2, "I could have done so much more." You felt that he was just starting, and you felt, watching those episodes, you could see him settling into the role and feeling more comfortable as the scripts got better. And I think that from his point of view as an actor, he probably found stories like Aliens of London, possibly even Rose, he probably felt they weren't quite the quality of scripts he'd hoped they would be, even though I think that Rose particularly is a great entry-level Doctor Who story. I could see that as an actor he might have been frustrated by it. But as the series wore on and the scripts got better and the show felt a bit more comfortable in its own skin again, his performance seems a bit more relaxed, and he moves into the role much more smoothly. And I think it is, and it remains, Doctor Who's greatest tragedy that he only ever did that one 13-episode run, because it would have been fascinating to see him develop in his next series and what he would have done when he felt, well, I've got a series behind me, I know what I'm doing now, where can I go for the next series, what other things can I do with the character? But of course, behind the scenes stuff made that impossible, which, as I say, is still a great Doctor Who tragedy. So what do we get from these 13 episodes? We get a series that very delicately reintroduces the Doctor. It doesn't swamp the series with its history, which I think is something it has done a fair bit over the last few years. But all it gives us really is the Doctor, the TARDIS, and the Dalek. We get a reference to a Cyberman in the Dalek episode, an oblique reference to Davros, but it's very much a standalone series that obviously acknowledges its past, because I think it has to. I think a show that's been around for 60 years now has to live with its past, even if it doesn't live with it on screen all the time. But it has to be aware of its past and be comfortable with it. And I think what the show had to do here, and I think Russell T Davies got rid of the whole mythos of the Time Lords, which was stodgy and stagey and slightly dull. Got rid of all that. So you had the last of the Time Lords. He's out there. He's looking for company. He finds company. And the idea that what he's been through has sort of humanised him in a way. Not in a shoot you out or crying every week way, but it's given him an empathy with humanity and emotions that perhaps he's never had before, which is why he bonded with Rose in a way that was more romantic than we'd ever seen before. And as I said, we don't leave the galaxy, and Russell was quite keen that they should not go to the planet Og in search of the Crystal of Zog, because who gives a damn about that? We moved more into those sort of other world stories as the things progressed. But the best Doctor Who stories were, and I think still are, those set on modern day Earth where weird stuff's going on. It was interesting that the Doctor is described as this traveller in time and space, but this whole season is set in our galaxy. I don't think that works to its detriment, but clearly it had to open up in its second season. But they did that because they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know if this was going to be a hit. They didn't know if there was an audience, a family audience for stuff like this. I do remember one television commentator on a show just before the show relaunched saying, well, this isn't going to work, that audience isn't there anymore. You know, Saturday night, families watching TV. Huh. Of course, it is still a big thing. Strictly Come Dancing is a huge hit with the family. And of course, Doctor Who was the first family drama series there'd been for decades, really. And it led to things like Merlin, Robin Hood and Atlantis, which followed, all with varying levels of success. So I think that looking back on that first season now, I'm excited to think about the ideas and the energy. I think that's what I get from that first season. The sheer energy, and particularly in Rose. You watch that episode, Rose, and it is literally shouting at you from the screen. Look at us, look, this is Doctor Who. Doctor Who is back on screen. Look at it, it's great. And that's what Rose shouts at me. Whatever you think of the plot line, the storyline, or, you know, all it is the nesting consciousness and the Doctor pours something into it and kills it. That's not important. The episode is bringing back Doctor Who to the screen. And that's what every frame of that episode does to me. I watch it now and I still get a buzz from the energy of it and the vibrancy of it. Yes, there have been more sophisticated, cleverer, darker stories since then. But Rose, I think, encapsulates everything that modern Doctor Who strove to be and was from the outset. Although there were obviously bumps along the way in terms of the cast. So that's season 1 of Doctor Who, in retrospect, 20 years on. I did think of doing this video, actually. I was going to do it in March. But the announcement of Christopher Eccleston returning to the show yesterday made me think, now's the time to do it, I think. Now's the time to look back at that season and remind myself of it and remind you of it and why it is such an important season. Whatever you think of it, whatever you think of the fact that it's all largely Earth-bound or this galaxy-bound, and it doesn't obsess of the details of Doctor Who's history. And I think that was the most important decision Russell T Davies made, is to dump the Time Lords. Don't worry about all the chronology and all the history. You can drip feed that back in as you need to. And the show's done it ever since. It's brought back some quite obscure characters, well-known characters, as Cybermen in season 2. But I think it was a gentle reintroduction to Doctor Who, which was what was needed in a series of really good, interesting, dynamic and spectacular episodes. So I'm glad that Christopher Eccleston and Billie Piper are back. I'm glad that they're continuing their professional relationship. And it makes me feel, as I said, it makes me feel warm, because it reminds us and it shows how important that season of television was to them. Despite all the bickering and stuff that was going on and the undoubtedly very tense atmosphere. Because remember, BBC Wales were making a big scale, quite big budget science fiction show from Cardiff with the sort of scale of production the BBC had never done before. Anything like this. Even when they were doing Doctor Who, it was never on this scale. So obviously there were mistakes made. There were things that happened that shouldn't have happened. And the show learned and moved on and grew and became better because of what it had learned in this superb first series. So as I said, I'm glad that Chris and Billie are back reconciled, and I'm glad that they've realised that these characters are important to them personally as artists, as actors. And it shows that Christopher Eccleston and Billie respect these characters and respect that year or so in their lives when they work closely together, that they're willing to do it again now. So more power to them, and more power to season 1 of Doctor Who, which of course is on the iPlayer. and it's on Blu-ray and DVD and so on, and remains one of the most important seasons of Doctor Who, no matter what you think of it, whether you think its quality is variable or some episodes are too silly. It's one of the most important seasons of Doctor Who ever made. Right, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this little video. It's gone on a bit longer than I hoped, but please make allowances. I just want to say in closing, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, of course. In the last week, I had dozens of new subscribers. Some of my retro videos, particularly the Stone Tape, which I put on last week, I thought that would be of interest. I didn't think it would be massively of interest. It's got about 4,000 views, and it's brought in lots of subscribers, loads of comments, really nice, interesting comments. And that's all I want, really, is just to get people on board who enjoy the stuff and are able to talk about it without fear of humiliation and arguments and swearing. And that's what this channel is all about. So it's so good to see so many new people coming on board. 1,800 subscribers at the time of recording this, which is about 1,700 more than I thought I would ever get. So every time something like this happens, I feel I must come on here and say, thank you so much for subscribing. I will, however, say that looking at my analytics, 69% of my viewers aren't subscribed to the channel. So people are watching the videos and not subscribing to the channel. Entirely all right, you don't have to subscribe, but it would be nice if you did. Press like, press subscribe, and stick around, because there's 550 odd videos on this channel, and if you look back, there's bound to be something that you're interested in. There is a lot of retro stuff on this channel, and my analytics do show that my audience is slightly more mature than most of the screaming hyper kids that are on YouTube. But if there's a niche, I'm happy to fill it. So it will be lovely to have you all stick around here, liking and subscribing, and of course leaving those lovely comments. Right, I'm out of here now. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.